to start by introducing myself, and my name is Jeff Rankin, and I'm Director of Communications at the college, but I also sort of serve as the college's unofficial historian because I've been doing a lot of historical research in the 20-some years I've been here at the college, and I've been involved in, when we had our sesquicentennial in 2003, I was one of the authors of the history book, so I had to do a lot of research at that time. But one of the most fascinating episodes in the college history, and one that spanned, most of the 20th century, was the story of the cannon. And the whole thing started really in about 1900, and there was the class of 1903 and the class of 1904. And in those days there were intense class rivalries where the junior class and the senior class were always at odds. So there were several battles between, literal battles, climbing into the cupola of the old Main and taking it over. And there were things where a gun was discharged. There was Washington's birthday banquet. That was always a big thing every year. And somebody threw a stink bomb in there. And so there was just this real bitter rivalry between the two. So anyway, when the class of 1903 got ready to graduate in that spring of '03, they decided they were going to give a class gift. And as you may have seen, there's some big white stones on the campus. In the early days, there wasn't much money, so those would be like a typical class gift. They would haul the stone out of Cedar Creek and put it on campus as sort of a memorial. Well, they decided they'd give something a little more substantial, and they decided they would try to get a cannon to go in front of the flagpole out in front of campus. And so they contacted a congressman, and because it is federal property, they had to go through that channel. And there were Civil War ordnance and leftover cannon at the Rock Island Arsenal, and that's where they went about getting this cannon. They actually had to go through the mayor of Monmouth. He had to actually make the request, and so he did, and so arrangements were made that one of the cannons would come down here to Monmouth. Well, it came down on the train, and it was left out for a few days on the at the depot, sort of out on the platform, and it was getting in the way. So the people at the depot didn't like it, so they had it moved to a barn nearby for storage. Well, the class of '04 found out about this, and they were going to decide they would steal the cannon so that the rivals' class gift would not be able to be given. So they made plans. They got two horses and wagons, and they went to this barn like at midnight when the lights were all out in town. And one of the the barrel of the cannon they were going to put on one of the wagons, and then the carriage they were going to pull behind the other wagon. And the idea was that they would go down to the Mississippi River at Oquawka and deposit both into the river. Well, when they tried to lift the barrel of the cannon, it was 800 pounds, and they promptly dropped it in the mud. So they spent like 45 minutes trying to get the barrel up again. And by this time it was getting late, and they were worried, and said, well, we can't get to Oquawka, so let's do the next best thing, and we'll go out north of town to where Cedar Creek is, and we'll put it in Cedar Creek. So in order not to be detected, one wagon went one way and the other went the other way, and they met out north of town by where Farm King is. And then they proceeded to Cedar Creek and got out there. Then they found out that the ground was really muddy around the creek, so if they tried to get the cannon to the creek, it was sinking in the ground. They couldn't do it. So they decided they would burn the carriage on the bank, and they did that, but they still couldn't get the barrel over there. So somebody remembered there was a bridge about a mile east of there, so they took the wagon, went to this bridge, and they dumped it over the bridge, the barrel. So immediately the cannon just stuck in the mud straight up, so they had to strip down and get down in the water and try to drag it out of sight, which they did. And so it was really getting late, so they all hurried back to Monmouth, and they lived in a rooming house on East 2nd Avenue. There weren't dorms back in those days. So, and some of the class of 1903 actually lived with them in that same dorm. So just as they were getting there, one of the kids from the graduating class was going to the bathroom, and so the ringleader, he had to jump into bed with his muddy clothes and everything, pretend to be asleep. So anyway, that was the end of that night. Now the next day, everybody was all in anticipation. Oh, it's going to be found out, and you know the senior class is going to be out for blood, and there was nothing. Nobody said a word, you know. And then finally, about that afternoon, the local newspaper came out, and a farmer had reported that he found this this carriage, burned carriage, on his land, and so it was traced to the gift from the class of '03. And so, of course, the next day, the class of '03 went out with their clubs and stuff, ready to, you know, go to war again. But nobody in the class of '04 said a word. I mean, everybody who knew anything kept their mouths absolutely sealed shut, and so they couldn't really pin it on anybody. So it kind of was left there. Nothing happened until that summer. And then a grand jury was convened because it was federal property, and they tried to get to the bottom of it. Well, one of the, I guess, advisors from the class of '04 was an attorney and a judge, and he advised them what to do. And basically, he got them all off, and nobody was arrested or anything. And so for the next 25 years, the cannon just basically was lost. Although that first summer, the water went down in the creek and it was visible, so one of the kids had seen it and he went and piled rocks in front of it. And then later, they went actually and moved the cannon and buried it farther down in the creek, so it was lost. So 25 years later, at the 25th reunion dinner, there was a plan to try to resurrect the cannon and give it as a gift of goodwill to the other class. They went down there with horses and scoops and stuff, and they couldn't find it because the creek had shifted course. So they really couldn't do anything except Wallace Barnes, who was the ringleader, and he was an older boy because he had served in the Spanish-American War, and he was kind of a veteran. And at the time he was president of Illinois Bankers Life, which was a big life insurance company based in Monmouth. He had kept the elevating screw for the cannon, the original one, for all those 25 years. He used it as a doorstop at home. So he gave this elevating screw to President McMichael as, you know, we don't have the cannon, but here's our token, you know, we want to give back to the college. And we still have that elevating screw in the archives that he gave. This would have been in 1927, I believe. So, again, nothing happened for a long time. We were getting ready to observe our centennial for the college in 1953. So there was an effort, again, to try to locate the cannon. And David Fleming, who was the assistant to the president, he's a guy that, he passed away a few years ago, but I knew him well. He convinced Wallace Barnes to come clean and tell the whole story. So in the 1950 Alumni magazine, he basically told everything he knew about where the cannon was, you know, where they put it, and all this. And so at that time, Professor Garrett Thiessen, who was a chemistry professor, real character, and Haldeman Thiessen was named after him, he got interested in this whole cannon thing. So he led several teams out to Cedar Creek to try to find this cannon barrel. And they had no luck, you know. They tried everything. They used where they said, you know, this was a landmark and all this kind of thing. It should be there. It wasn't. So finally, got the idea to go to the power company and get a metal detector. So, and this was in 1953, the centennial of the college. And finally, with the use of the metal detector, they found it. And it was, again, because the stream had shifted course, it was in a different place, but they found it. Well, so this was a big deal, and but they were worried, you know, if word got out that they'd found it, it would be stolen. So basically, they took it to the Monmouth Armory, which was down on South First Street, and they put it down in the basement there, and that's where they kept it until they could figure out what to do. And so, again, they were worried, you know, if they brought it to campus, it would get stolen right away and that sort of thing. So Dr. Thiessen had an idea that he would bury it in concrete. And his office was in McMichael Academic, which at the time was the science hall. So looking out his window, he wanted a vantage point where he could see it, and they had a hole dug, probably about 4 feet deep, and put the cannon barrel down into that, poured concrete around it, and he waited and made sure it had set before he would leave it alone. So there it sat for probably another 40-some years, until, well, almost 40 years, until the Wells Theater was built in 1990. And over those years, it would be a tradition to paint it every year, like different classes would paint it, and so it had like paint this thick on it. Anyway, so when they built the theater, they had to move it. So they decided, well, appropriate thing would be to move it to the Haldeman Thiessen, because again, that's the science building. So they used a backhoe and they dug up the whole concrete collar and everything, took it over and put the whole concrete thing into the ground in front of Haldeman Thiessen. So there it sat. So then, for 6 years later, Professor Urban had a class, and one of his students, her name was Seidel Harker, she was from the Quad Cities, and she told him that her father was part of the Civil War reenactment group. And it's called Scott's Battery, and they were a pretty active group, and they'd appeared in films like Gettysburg and some of the Civil War films, Glory. And she had talked to her father, and he was pretty sure that this cannon could be restored, and it would be, a valuable thing. So they decided they would try to do that, and they made arrangements, and they pulled the thing out, and they used a jackhammer to get the concrete off, and they sent it up to the Quad Cities where they lived in Davenport for the summer, and they worked on it all summer and got it all cleaned up, and it was just beautiful. And the plan was they would use the cannon, the Scott's Battery would use it every summer in their reenactments, and then it would come back to the college in the fall, and they could shoot it off at homecoming and be in the parade and all that sort of thing. Well, unfortunately, the Scott's Battery could never get insurance to do that, so they could not take it off campus. Estimates at the time, it was valued at maybe $40,000, but I think there were liability issues about shooting a cannon that didn't belong to them or whatever. So that first year, they also had to have a new carriage because the carriage burned, and so the family of an alum who had died decided in his memory to donate a new carriage, and they had one built meticulously that was true to the original. And by all intents and purposes, you couldn't tell it was a new one. So they had this beautiful cannon, beautiful new carriage, and then at homecoming that year, it was 1996, they dedicated it, fired it after every touchdown, and every year since they fired it after the touchdown at homecoming. So it was kept for a while in Haldeman Thiessen, and then it was difficult to get in and out, so they moved it into Glennie Gym, and that's kind of where it sits today. But the story has a lot more details, but that's I guess pretty involved anyway. So I don't know if you want to discuss any particular ones or not, but I'd be glad to try to give you some more background if you can think of any questions.
You can pause it.
Yeah.